So it's fantastic to be here. This is actually something pretty unique. You know, I've been in London for the past 10 years as part of the startup community there. I've actually never been in a room in London with a seed stage startup community this big. London has 10 million people to choose from. Helsinki has what? 1 million, obviously we've done, or Aaltoes has done some outreach elsewhere. But having 500 people or 400 plus people in this room today is one unbelievable achievement by Aalto Entrepreneur Society. So I think it's pretty amazing to be here. So, about myself, I'm the chief exec and co-founder of Playfish. But I'm more than anything, I guess I'm the quintessential startup guy. The reason I get up in the morning is to do something that's going to change the world. What I'm really passionate about is the fact that as an entrepreneur, you can literally do anything. You can leave a footprint in the world that other people can witness and amaze at for years and years and years to come. You can't do that really with big companies in the same way. So I'm completely addicted to entrepreneurship myself. I'm super passionate about entrepreneurship in general, very passionate about European entrepreneurship versus some of the stuff going on in the valley. I'm especially passionate about seeing world-beating companies coming out of Finland, because in so many ways we have so many other things required to create fantastic world-beating companies here in terms of the skills, the passion, the people, some of the increasingly the financing and other things. So I'm hugely excited to be here and do effectively what I can to contribute to the ecosystem here. So the talk that I'm going to give over the next 35, 40 minutes or so, titled From Big Ideas to Big Winners. What I've tried to do is sort of summarize, I guess, some of my biggest lessons from the past 10 years of starting up and building companies. God knows I made a lot of mistakes, and I figured if I can summarize, all the hundreds of various mistakes that I've learned from into 5 kind of concise lessons, then, I'm doing pretty well. If I've learned one thing every 2 years, that's kind of good. So that's what I thought I'd do. Overall, I guess, entrepreneurship in general, I think is an amazing thing, and I constantly, many of my friends work in investment banking and consultancy, and I feel sorry for them every day. But never more. Now you should too. Come on. Anyway, so never ever has there in my mind been a time that I felt sorrier for them than right now. The world is in many ways in crisis, in chaos, if you like. You look at stock markets. God knows, look at my home city, London, right now. You look at how big companies are in this bind where demand isn't growing. They have macroeconomic challenges, which makes investment difficult, which makes access to finance difficult. And you have consumer markets fundamentally changing. Everything is moving onto the internet. Not only is it moving onto the internet, but onto social media in different ways. Consumers are moving onto mobile devices. Consumption patterns are changing. How we work with each other, how we communicate is changing. All that is happening while the big companies can't really chase it. At the same time, for the small companies, the cloud, the tools like tools like Google Apps and other things is creating startups incredibly cheap. So you have this double whammy when you're a big company of, on the one hand, your consumers running away, and on the other hand, having much more powerful startups to compete with you. So it's an incredibly exciting time to be an entrepreneur. In fact, over the past 10, 12 years that I've been involved in startups, never has there been a more exciting time than right now. So many disruptions in the market, so many opportunities, and frankly, so cheap and quick to go after them. Even 5 years ago, the first thing you had to do was to install an email server in your company. It just took time, and managing that thing takes time. Now you just set up with Google Apps and you're done. So it's a super exciting time, and frankly, nowhere is there, in my opinion, a more exciting place than Helsinki right now to do it, purely because of the depth of talent here, clearly the passion that you guys have for doing this, and also for the momentum that's being created by some path creating companies like Rovio, for example, or Supercell and others who've invested a lot of, or who've attracted a lot of investment here. Anyway, so with that, I figured, let me just talk a little bit about me first so you get a sense of my kind of background. So I've been part of 3 big startup journeys. First one was Glue Mobile. I was a co-founder in 2001 of a company called Macrospace. We merged in 2004 with a company called Sorrent in the West Coast, renamed the combined company. We both hated each other's names. So we renamed the company Glue Mobile and grew it to one of the largest mobile games publishers in the world. We IPO'd in 2007. And having been there for 6 years and having seen it grow and feeling like my journey was complete, I left in order to set up Playfish. We started in 2007 with all the lessons learned, if you like, from my glue journey. This time being far more aggressive in lots of different ways. We raised a lot more capital. We raised 3 million off the back of our business plan, an additional 18 million 1 year into the venture, and ultimately ended up growing very fast. 2 years into the venture, we were already about 60 million players, significantly profitable, nearly 200 people, and so on. And ultimately, when choosing our path to grow, we had an opportunity to raise additional cash, go out and acquire the strategic capabilities that we needed in terms of multi-platform publishing capability and access to brands. We chose to partner up with Electronic Arts at that moment in time. Ended up selling the company for up to about $400 million. And we continue to grow very rapidly inside Electronic Arts today, and we are spearheading the transformation of the world's largest games publisher into being a digital or direct-to-consumer, digitally focused business. So in addition to those two, I was also on the board of directors of a company called Love Film. This is not necessarily so. If you know Netflix in the US, this is a mail order DVD business that started transforming into a digital streaming videos business about 2 years ago. Grew very rapidly. I joined the board in the beginning of 2010. We were on a run up to an IPO, but chose to ultimately sell the company to Amazon.com for about $300 million. So that's been kind of my past 10 years. It's been a fairly crazy ride, frankly. It's been a lot of fun, been pretty exciting, lots of interesting mistakes to learn from. But in lots of ways, I've also been incredibly fortunate. These companies actually all have worked out fairly well, and frankly, it's not much less down to me. I tend to do the talking. It's the teams that actually create the product, market it, QA it, manage the communities that ultimately, are the heroes who've made these companies work so well. But it's been an interesting thing to observe and an interesting thing to build. So, but in addition to that, I guess if I rewind a little bit more, I am Finnish, believe it or not, even though I talk very fast and I talk a lot. I grew up here. I was actually born up north in Pietarsaari. I then moved down south when I was about 4 or 5 years old, not by myself. My parents moved and I moved with them. And I went to school here. Actually, I went even to Sibbo Gymnasium. There you go. It's beautiful building. I did my first year of senior high school here. I then got a scholarship to go to do the International Baccalaureate at an international school in the US called United World College USA in New Mexico, in the middle of the mountains, which was a bit of a climate shock and culture shock, but it was really a lot of fun. In fact, one of my guys from my class from Belgium actually is a co-founder in both Macrospace and Playfish, so friendships can last for a long time. Networks matter. I then came back here to do my military service. Spent a year. And in fact, when I joined as a recruit, my drill sergeant was none other than Mikael Hed of Rovio fame. Little did I know when I was doing my Taakse Poistu exercises that one day I would come to respect the guy a lot. But there you go. So it's a small world, it's a theme. After that, I went to Cambridge University for 3 years, studied economics, had a lot of fun, learned to play rugby, learned to row boats and other things. I then actually joined a startup. This one I don't talk very much about because this one was a complete, utter, miserable failure. And I've actually learned more from this one than probably all the other startups combined. I joined a company called Digital Mobility. They took me out of university to effectively head up product management. That should have rung some alarm bells in its own. It didn't because I was pretty naive, frankly. Didn't know what I was doing. But Digital Mobility made things like WAP gateways, SMS services, all those cool things that a bunch of Finns as well made about 10 years ago. And it was a miserable failure for 100 reasons. I could have a 5-hour lecture on just why it was a miserable failure. But more than anything, I met some great people, saw some great market opportunities, saw some absolutely horrendous execution, saw some strategic decisions which just felt like, no, don't do this. And frankly, if it wasn't for this, I would have never become an entrepreneur. This, to me, was kind of a year out. I was going to continue studying, I was going to do other things. But just because I saw, like, look, if a company like this can nearly make it, I mean, come on, right? Anyone can nearly make it, right? So anyway, no disrespect to Digital Mobility in its own right. It was a tough market situation and other things, but genuinely, that was what kicked off my wanting to set up Macrospace, my first big company. In fact, together with colleagues from Digital Mobility, many of whom are still at Playfish today, like 2 ventures later, right? So just goes to show how networks and people are really what ultimately makes companies successful. But that's kind of my background. That's who I am. I'm a startup guy, super excited about building startups, super excited about supporting startups. Here in Finland, I'm not actively involved per se. I am an investor. in Lifeline Ventures, Petter is venture seed company here, or seed investor here, who I think is doing a fantastic job at supporting Finnish startups right now. I'm also an investor in a couple of other seed stage funds, namely Initial Capital, for example, in London and so on, all of whom have investments in Finland. So I'm indirectly involved, but right now full-time at Electronic Arts, continuing to both running the Playfish business unit, the social gaming business unit, but also helping transform the whole company to a digital, direct-to-consumer focused company, which is exciting. Anyway, that is my background. So what I was instead going to focus on, rather than just talking about Playfish or any of the other journeys individually, what I was going to focus on was sort of consolidated 5 lessons that I wish somebody would have taught me when I started 10 years ago. What I'm not going to talk about, because it's always good to define that, the most important things that you have in a startup is the team and the idea that you have. I'm not actually going to talk about those 2 things because there's clearly been a ton of talk about those things happening here previously. Also, I'm not going to talk about metrics-driven iteration and the importance of feedback, lean startup, the various R, pirate startup models and things that you can read about in really good blogs, like whether it's Dave McClure or Eric Ries and others. So there's lots of good blogs to read about these things. I'm not going to talk about them. I'm instead going to talk about some slightly higher level lessons, if you like. When you think of approaching a business and growing a business, what are the kind of things that you should think long and hard about before making a decision? So my first lesson, which I wish, frankly, I would have gotten earlier when I was building Macrospace and Glue, is to build a bold vision and then make it bigger. What I mean by this is that you can choose when you set up, whatever you do, even if you do the same thing over 6 months, you can choose to either be a company that makes a game, you can be a company that makes this little widget that might help some pharmaceutical companies one day, or you can be the company that transforms an industry. You can be the company that goes after the $100 billion opportunity. Sure, you have to start somewhere, this is the first plan, but ultimately, when I'm talking about this, I talk about when you look at your idea of doing something, how can you expand its potential to be as big as humanly possible? Why would you do this? Well, the most significant reason is actually threefold. I mean, one, when you go to an investor and you look for investment, you look for $1 million of investment in order to fund your startup that makes tools of some kind for the web or for analytics, for example. If your vision is something that looks like it's going to be a $30 or $50 million company, if it's successful, which by the way is a pretty successful company, there's nothing wrong with that. But if that's the end result, if that's the end product of what you're doing, no investor, no world-class investor whose most scarce asset is their time. They might think, yeah, I could make some return of this, I invest $1 million, I might get $10 million. They're not really that interested. What they're interested in is companies where they can put in $20, $30, $40 million over time, more maybe, and make $1 billion in return. So for you to attract world-class investors who ultimately help you build that big company, your vision has to be big enough. So whenever you have your vision statement in your business plan, think how can you make it bigger? How can you make it more compelling? How can you make it even more all-encompassing? The same thing can be said for talent. The best people in the world, by definition, make the best startups in the world. You will attract the best talent by having the biggest vision. It's that simple. You will get the biggest talent is going to come and talk to you. They want to see your investor deck. Where are you aiming? If you're aiming too low, they're going to look at, am I going to go for the company that aims here or the company that aims here? Probably the one that aims here, right? And then finally, as an entrepreneur, where I started off was, it's your opportunity to change the world. Why not go out and change the world if you have the opportunity? Here's your opportunity to get the financing, get the top talent, and ultimately make your mark on the world. Take it. Life's too short. In terms of how do you do this? Well, I mean, as I said, just take your vision and just try to augment it. Augment it, like what if, like what would be the next step, and the next step, and the next step? What would this look like 5 years from now if everything goes to plan? So 2 bullets here. One is try to find either you create or you disrupt the market that either you hit 1 billion users or you could hit potentially a $10 billion market. The reason I'm kind of picking these numbers from thin air, but the reason why it's important, and this is mainly for direct-to-consumer businesses, B2B businesses with 1 billion users would be quite ambitious. But into direct-to-consumer service, the reason I'm picking these is because I would challenge you to think if what you're doing is tools for a 3D printing, say, for example, How can you extend that vision in such a way that in 3 to 5 years' time, this is something that everybody's going to do? Or in some other way, you can create a market that's ultimately $10 billion in value. And the reason I'm picking these numbers is because they're kind of out of thin air, but with a 10% market share, you end up at $1 billion in revenue, and I think that's what you always should be aiming at. It kind of sounds ridiculous to aim for $1 billion in revenue, but you need to do it, because you need to challenge yourself that is, you have the opportunity to do it. Why waste time on that thing that makes $5 million in revenue if you can aim for something that makes $1 billion in revenue? And it's not so much even just the piles of dollars, but it's your impact on the world. It's what you've done, what you can tell your mum when you come back home, who, by the way, mine still doesn't believe I have a real job. So, good luck explaining to your mums. Anyway, so do that, but then also create a step-by-step strategy to get there. Because just saying we're going to be $1 billion is could be a little bit out there. Figure out how can you attack this market first, then that market, and then the total aggregate number is huge, but every individual step makes sense. That's how you do it. Our challenge with Macrospace was our vision wasn't big enough early on, so we couldn't raise enough money early on to become massive as quickly as we could have done. There were other companies that became bigger, like Jamdat in mobile games, even though we felt like we had a better product early on. So do this; it'll really help you. I'll just run through a quick Playfish example on this, just to give you a sense of how to tell a story with a big vision. Those of you who don't know, Playfish, we're a social games company. We create games for people to play together on Facebook and other social networks. And that is very commonplace today. 3 years ago, or 4 years ago, when we were pitching this to VCs, at the time, it was like, Flash games don't make any money. So instead of pitching us as a Flash games company, we would pitch the industry like this. People spend $50 billion in computer games today. This was 4 years ago. Why do they spend that money? It's bigger than movies. It's bigger than music in most countries. Why do people spend that? It's because computer games are better at generating emotions of people than almost any other form of media. You don't see these kind of faces of people watching movies or listening to music very often. And that's because we're so good at generating these crazy emotions: joy, achievement, suspense, fear, greed, wonder, frustration, horror, and so on. But these are all they are testosterone-driven masculine kind of feelings, and they are things that you ultimately only can address a fairly small part of the market. For you to, in fact, that dude, right? These are the folks that you can attract with that kind of strategy. But still, $50 billion of revenue in this market. What about social emotions? In fact, the Nintendo Wii had launched just about this time. I know it feels like ages ago, but that was a real fundamental revolution in how you could market computer games, not by monsters on the screen, but by turning the camera around and showing players, showing families and friends playing together. So these social emotions actually grew the computer games industry by a ton that year. In fact, nearly all the growth from about 45 to 50 billion that year was in Nintendo. So our vision was to go out and change how the world plays computer games by creating these social and connected experiences between friends, where we return games to where games came from, the fundamental emotional reason why you play board games, for example. Tap into these emotions and use social networks, that new crazy thing of 2007, the Facebook platform, which nobody had figured out any use for. We're going to use that in order to ultimately reach 1 billion users. And we're going to do that by lowering the access barriers to computer games. You discover them through friends, one-click play, as opposed to 35 clicks to get hold of World of Warcraft. And we're going to make it easy and simple for everybody to get hold of, and we'll keep you in terms of the social gameplay hooks. Ultimately, we will use that opportunity to go out and transform the whole computer games industry from a physical products-driven market where people play standalone and pay money up front into a digital services-driven market where people play socially with friends and pay ongoing. We are going to be right at the forefront of that. We are not a Flash games company. Instead, we are going to take a $50 billion industry head on. We are going to be the mammals in an industry filled with dinosaurs. That is what we're going to win. Great pitch until one of the dinosaurs comes and talks to you and wants to partner up, and then that becomes a bit complicated. Then you need to rewrite the slide. But you still get what I'm after with this particular lesson. Go and build a big, exciting vision. You will get both the funding, the following, the press stories. Everything comes from that. So daring, and in some ways it's daring to, frankly, have the balls to do it. Make it bigger. Find a way to tell that bigger story, because it is just so exciting, right? Do it. Yay, that's it, do it. Couple of quick notes, however. Big does not mean arrogant. Just because you can paint the computer games industry in the form of dinosaurs, you still need to respect the dinosaurs, right? So you don't need to, when you tell your story, make sure that you find a way to be humble in the right places. Because ultimately, you need people to be on your side. You don't want you to be pointed at as being that guy who thinks that he's better than everybody else. But painting that vision, it's perfectly compatible with being humble about how you're going to reach it. Excited but humble. Second thing is, ultimately, execution is everything at the end of the day. You've got to make that big vision, but you've got to execute toward it also. I just feel like Finns and folks in this room and startups generally are really good at execution. They build one brick at a time and they polish the bricks and make sure they're perfect. Sometimes they forget to zoom out and think of what a crazy city and world they can build with those bricks. So execution is important, but start with a big vision. The other thing is actually, us Finns tend to be genetically hardwired to be shy and not really want to tell our story and be kind of, if anything, kind of belittling what we're trying to achieve. At least everybody else, other than Peter Westerbacka from Rovio, whose genes, I don't know where they came from, but boy, can that guy tell a story. Which is wonderful, by the way, I think it's great. So I just encourage you guys just to find a way to get rid of that little piece of Finnishness. There's lots of really fantastic bits of Finnishness which we should hold on to. And in fact, the business ethics in Finland, the approach, the stamina, the wanting to get stuff done, and the team spirit is world class. So keep hold of that. But that was my lesson number 1. Lesson number 2, this is a combined lesson. 1, raise more money than you think you need. And kind of 1 or 2A, rather, raise it from people that you would hire. What does this mean? This means that when you go out and raise money, you will need a certain amount of money. You think that based on your business plan, you have a certain dip. You think you're going to need to access $2 million to become profitable and all that stuff. What I'm saying is that you should raise the amount of money compatible with the size of your vision, not with the size of your cash needs right now. So the reason to do that is, 1, raising money is a massive distraction. When you go out and you start doing your pitch deck, you do your kind of, this is how I'm going to tell my story. You practice in front of the mirror, you have your clicker, you go this is why we're going to change the world and dinosaurs and all this kind of stuff. That is time away from spending time with your team and your product. The more that you do that, the more people want to hear from you, the more they're going to send you emails and ask for this detail and that detail in your cap table and your current plans and your title plan for the next 10 years, all sorts of things. It is enormously distracting. Your skill set, your superpower is being an entrepreneur, not being a pitch person. So choose when you do raise money, do it once and properly. Don't risk that you might have to come back in 6 months to do it again, because you're going to decrease your chances of success. Second reason is, the world is an uncertain place. The thing you thought might work may not work. Give yourself some runway. Give yourself time to make mistakes. Give yourself time to learn from those mistakes. You don't want to have the amount of money that gets you halfway through the first product and then realizing that the metrics are telling you this thing isn't working and you don't have enough runway to make a second. Because then, if you don't make a second product, you're never, frankly, going to be successful. So you give yourself enough time to make a mistake, because the world is an uncertain place. And thirdly, this is more related to from the people you would hire front. Getting money from investors is like getting married. You will go through good times together. You'll go through bad times together. Everything is always great at the pitch situation. They'll tell you how much they love you. They'll be there for you. They'll support you. They'll be hands off. They won't touch anything that you don't want them to touch in the business. This analogy gone too far. But the point is that ultimately, when the bad times come or when you have tough decisions, they'll show their true colors. And that is when you need folks who can help you think, help you make the right decision. We stand by you in the way that friends or a good spouse would in those situations. There is nothing, and this is, by the way, a fairly big contrast between my experiences. You can choose, you can guess which 3 and so on. But I've been on a board where trying to go through a big liquidity event that wasn't a fundraise was a really difficult thing to do. We had actually a massive fight in the boardroom. Took us a long time. Massive distraction for me. Massive, difficult kind of discussion all the way along. And ultimately, we got there and it was okay. But really, I just sort of realized that was a really tough conversation. I then went through another conversation. In fact, I'm happy to plug the Playfish investors here, both Index and Excel, which was unbelievably easy. They were with us all the way, right from the start. They were very, very supportive throughout all the different conversations we had, both in terms of fundraisers and exits and other opportunities. And they were really there for us when the times were kind of really intense. So these guys can be massive accelerators for you in terms of help. They can also, in everything, from business development to contacts to all the other things that come with helping you think through your strategy, and they can be a massive hindrance if they choose not to be helpful or they choose to, in fact, be obstructive to your business. So choose them carefully, just like your wife or husband. So how? So on the amount, calculate what you need and double and triple. It's kind of a cliche, but what I would say is just raise commensurate with your vision. When you raise money, you're going to be giving away somewhere between 15 and 30% of your company, typically. So to some degree, the valuation of the company ends up being determined by the round that you raise. And the round that you raise should be compatible with your vision. If you're going to take over the world, like in our case, in Playfish, when we raised our second round, our $18 million round, we were cash flow positive. We were growing really quickly, and our profits were growing. We didn't really need money, but we really wanted that war chest so that if something happens or whatever, so it gives us that flexibility of putting in a lot more money into the market where need be. So just raise more than you think you need across the board. And then interview your VC candidates. The VCs are literally like lemmings. Either they all hate you or they all love you, right? That's the way it goes, for better or worse. They operate like that. So if you're in the fortunate position where you have traction with those, you have traction with consumers, investors get excited by it, interview them just like you would interview a senior staff member, a chief operating officer for your company. It's that important. What are they going to do for you? So, Mr. Investor, I have some pretty big growth challenges over the next 3 years. What are you going to do for me? How do you think you can help with contacts? Literally, put a set of interview questions for them, just like you would interview staff. It'll dazzle them. They'll go like, whoa, hold on a second, what's going on here? Are you interviewing me? But it's seriously a good thing to do. You get a much better sense of how they can actually help you. They are members of your team. They bring money, sure, but ultimately they bring themselves. And you want to hire folks, ultimately, that are going to support you and your team. So do that. My lesson number 2, raise more money than you need from people you would hire. Lesson number 3, and you're going to get a theme of Star Wars analogies here. I love Star Wars, I'm sorry, I just enjoy the analogies. Develop strategic capabilities through strategic talent. What on earth does that mean? When you set up your startup, there are things which will be important for your 5-year success, and there are things which will not be important for your 5-year success. You should always hire the best team you can. That goes without saying. But there are some areas where you must be the best in the world to win. There are other areas where it's okay just to be top 5 in the world. So, for example, in a games company, you might say we need the best creatives. You might say we must have the best direct-to-consumer distribution, for example, and we must have the best technology. You actually, in terms of your customer support and your operations, your finance director, your other things, maybe you decide that those are not quite as important. The reason I'm saying it's worth tiering these, even though you should always hire the best people you can, is because one, top talent is transformational. That's kind of obvious. You've hired the best person in the world. They will make your company the best company in the world at that specific discipline. That much is obvious. But top talent is very scarce and it's very hard to get hold of, and it is unbelievably expensive. They will come and talk to you and they'll say, I want 3% of your company. And you go, what? For doing what? They are very expensive. They're very difficult to get hold of, but you need them to win. So when you think about this, you don't want to get this. You don't want to get the best in the world in every single possible discipline because one, you're not going to afford it. You're not going to be able to do it. It's too hard. Think where you really need it and then go all out and get it. It is all about strategy, putting your troops on the north border, leaving the southern border exposed because you know the enemy's up north. That's what strategy is. If you put your troops everywhere around the border, then that's not strategy. That's just suicide, probably. But anyway, so that's why you need to do it. So how do you do that? Identify the capabilities that you're going to need to win. Look at the things that you know are long-term value drivers for you versus transient, shorter-term things. Be paranoid about blind spots here. I would challenge all of you guys to think about marketing very, very, very hard. I've met enough Finnish startups so far to suggest that we have unbelievable product development expertise. We have unbelievable technical expertise. We are very close to the top of the world in these disciplines. Where we are not so strong right now is direct-to-consumer marketing. Is potentially product positioning, product marketing from that perspective. I think there, it's okay not to be strong at everything. That's fine. So long as I'm a huge believer in a strength approach to management. Understand what you're strong at, do that. Then take the things that you're weak at, understand what they are, hire world-class talent to do that. Hard to do out here, but find a way to do it. Find either a way for an investor to help you with that, find a way to outsource it, find a way to just kidnap somebody from the Silicon Valley, bring them here, do it. It'll be expensive, it'll be difficult, but I would challenge you guys to at least think about marketing. There's probably 100 other things, but marketing is something that I've seen. There are for example, when starting Playfish, my own personal blind spot was just how transformational high scalability engineering talent is. I thought coding is coding. I've made games for 6 years, Let's get a good person from Google to help run our, run our engineering department. As it turns out, you actually need a ton of really, really, really strong talent across the board, and you need really strong engineering leaders. I didn't realize that early enough. I now know. So you learn these things as you go along, but challenge yourself for blind spots. Go ask somebody who's an expert at that discipline that you just don't believe in. It's not that important in your mind. Ask them and then hear their explanation and then figure out whether it's actually important or not. And then finally, hire as senior as you can. Pay the price. When you know that you have a little bit of traction, get the best people in the world doing this, what you need to do. One of the most respectable things I think that Zynga ever did as part of their growth, they're our biggest competitor in social games, and not to imply that anything else they did was not respectable, but let me just say that one of the more respectable things they did was actually to attract a ton of world-class talent. They recognized their own blind spot in making great games, and they raided all the big games companies to get their best game development talent, really ruthlessly and methodically, and they did a really good job at that. Good for them. So that's a good example of understanding that was a strategic capability they needed to build, and they secured strategic talent for it. Do it. Next lesson number 4. Keep it simple. You hear this a lot, but complexity really is kryptonite for entrepreneurs. It's very, very hard to create a business and run a business. It just is. I mean, many of you guys have been doing this for a while. It just is very hard. If you start running 2 or 3 or 4 businesses because you choose to have multiple business models, multiple products, multiple locations, multiple offices, multiple markets. You want to enter China because it's big. You want to enter Latin America because that's also big. And you also want to launch a second line of product. They are all tempting. Very, very tempting things to do because you look at, especially you think investors are going to want to hear that because, here's a $1 billion market. Like China is always $1 billion no matter what the area is. You think they want to hear that, but actually really savvy investors want to hear focus. You can put that in your 5-year plan. The reason you're going to be $1 billion in revenue is because 200 million of that's going to come from China in year 5. But year 1, laser focus. One business model. Don't do the old kind of transactions, kind of advertising, kind of a little bit of freemium maybe and some other sponsored stuff. Choose one model. Choose it and chase it. You can always add it. Year 3 plan. The reason you're going to grow an additional $50 million revenue stream is the advertising revenue. But chase the transactional revenue or advertising or whatever it is mercilessly initially. You need to prove the thing works. The fact that you start chasing 3-4 different revenue streams is not good. It'll defocus you. It'll defocus you from what you need to do for your customers and your players or your users, and it'll defocus you in terms of what you need to do to develop your business moving forward, and it'll defocus your message on who you are when you tell your story. One office location. Second office adds massive overhead. It's massive overhead. Sometimes this will conflict with your strategic capability. We made the decision that strategically it was important for us to build out capability in China and in the Silicon Valley. Very early, in fact, within 3 months of setting up the company. And we set up subsidiaries out there that quickly. Added a massive overhead to me personally, both in terms of travel, in terms of hassle, in terms of we had to learn the same lessons everywhere. I hold still today that it was the right decision to make, but it came at a much, much bigger price than I ever thought that it would. Wherever possible, stick to one location, especially product development in one location. If you have distribution somewhere else, may be possible. But even then, you want to have that closed loop of making a better product through learning from distribution. Keep it simple. The best companies in the world, Steve Jobs, in fact, says that he's really proud of all of Apple's products. He's even prouder of all the products that Apple decided not to make. Keep it simple. This next slide is about becoming or hiring a master storyteller. I actually didn't really like the fact that I got a picture of Steve Jobs here. I would have actually loved to instead put a picture of Mark Zuckerberg. If you haven't heard his talks, he's the most Finnish sounding of Silicon Valley entrepreneurs in terms of his comfort being on stage. That's why I say that. He's naturally, he's unbelievably bright. He's very, very driven. He's not, especially early on, if you listen to his early talks, he was never particularly comfortable, with a microphone and talking to big groups of people. But boy, is he inspirational. Boy, can he tell a story. And he's such a great person to learn from because of that. What is master storytelling, firstly? Storytelling is firstly developing a story that's worth listening to, and 2, learning to tell it in a way which is captivating and interesting, that people want to listen to. When you're at a pitch event, VCs hear 100 pitches every week. You want yours to stand out. Your employees, when these stars come in through your door and they go like, shall I join this company? The world-class analytics director or whatever. You need to be able to tell your story in a way which is going to get them to join. Whether it's new staff, whether it's investors, whether it's a marketplace, anything, you need to be able to tell your story. As an entrepreneur, you are also a storyteller. You've got to live with that. If you decide that that's not what you're good at, because that's really tough, and it is hard, right? One, you can learn it, but two, even more important, you can hire it. You can go ahead and hire Peter Westerbacke to tell your story, because he will tell it in a way which will be entertaining and you want to listen to it. So, why do this? It's the most effective industry marketing by some margin. It is much more effective than hiring your PR agency. PR agencies can help a little bit in the fringes, but you've got to tell your story. You've got to go out there and be able to understand what your story means for the industry, why it's relevant, and how to tell it in a way which is captivating. It adds a multiplier on everything. It adds a multiplier on your perceived value, your business development leads, your PR leads, your players even, because they are interested, like the early adopters are interested in cool stories. Just adds a multiplier on absolutely everything, including your enterprise value of what you're building. So how? One, create a story with bold values and vision. The way I've done that in the past, and the way I would suggest that you start, is take your whole story. You end up with a 100-page pitch deck and whatever it is, like 197 pages of docs or whatever it was earlier. Simplify, 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 simplify. Find big, bold images. Find images which describe sort of in a symbolical way, like the games industry being a landscape of dinosaurs. Find a way to describe the world that you're changing, the problem that you're solving, in a way which is memorable and visual. Then go ahead and convert that to thought leadership in the industry. Make sure you can participate in conversations, whether it's a conference on XYZ, or whether it's a blog conversation, some tweets going on or whatever. Make sure that you can contribute with an interesting opinion. Journalists are interested in interesting opinions. They're not really interested in you and your companies. If you can find a way to create an interesting opinion that you can then back up with the fact that you're also an interesting company, you will get a ton more coverage, and coverage generates more coverage. Then finally, presentation and media skills. This is something which is there is no shame not to be a great presenter. It's no shame not to be a great storyteller. You can go out and learn this. This is perfectly learnable. There are tons of coaches for this kind of thing. There's tons of people who can help you both either literally in the business community or alternatively there's presentation coaches. People who help you. Some PR agencies have specific functions on this where they can help you get really great. Look at an early presentation by Mark Zuckerberg. Look at a late presentation by Mark Zuckerberg. Great example of just how much practice and coaching helps in these areas. This is a strategic skill. You've got to have it. The only way you're going to get there is by practicing. But I suggest really that this is something that, frankly, I wish I would have spent a lot more time on earlier on. I ended up telling I was okay at telling the story, but the story was far too complex. 100 slides, and this, and that, and that. I didn't learn the art of simplification until very recently. If, judge me on this presentation. Perhaps still too complex. So, those were kind of my, lessons for startups. The things, the kind of really big meta themes, if you like, that have been really important to me that I wish I would have picked up earlier. Here's also a little bit of advice. Moving on from the field of startups and the company to you individually as the entrepreneur. Again, things that I've sort of come to learn, if you like, or advice that I would have again given myself 10 years ago. One, startups are a hits business. Many of them fail, and it's okay to fail. In fact, I personally have always learned much more from a failure, whether it's a project failure like launching a game that's tanked, or whether it's a startup failure like digital mobility, than I ever have from a success. Because you go over and over and over in your brain why the thing didn't succeed. And it gets, at least for me, it lights up this fire. I wanted to prove that I can fix that I can do this better. It's okay. You should think of your success arc as an entrepreneur. At your age and our age, we have 5, 6, 7 ventures in front of us at least. We should think of that arc. How can we learn the most? Fail quickly if you're going to fail. Go out and try. Go out boldly, all guns blazing. If it doesn't work, that's okay. Just cut your losses early. Be good about it. Be respectful about it. But ultimately, figure out it doesn't work. Tell your investors, tell your staff. And then ultimately, if you have enough money, pivot. If you don't have enough money, in an orderly fashion, shut down what you're doing right now. Try again. No shame in that. At all. In fact, I think the strongest entrepreneurs are the folks who've tried and tried and tried again. And they end up just getting smarter and smarter and smarter. I think for Mark Pincus, for example, my favorite best friend in the world at Zynga, I believe Zynga is his fifth or sixth venture. And boy, has he been aggressive about building that out, and boy, has he learned some lessons from his previous ones. So again, hits business. Remember, you're maximizing the arc over multiple startups. The one lesson I haven't learned is how to explain that to your mom, but learn it because it is real. I mean, that's ultimately how the greatest startups in the world are built. Secondly, do the right thing. It's a small world. Because you're part of an entrepreneur community, no matter how successful, how big a failure your current company is, people judge you for who you are. Sure, you get a halo from the company, right? If your company is doing incredibly well, then there's some halo effect on that, and more people will want to talk to you. If you look down on people, if you don't respect other people when you're winning, you will ultimately, the minute that you step out of that company and do something else, people will stop talking to you. That company halo is only a temporary halo. Build value for yourself by doing the right thing. So what I mean by that is, some random small company gets in touch with you, wants to do X, Y, Z. Try to respond to that mail, even if it's a one-liner saying, sorry, I'm really busy, I would love to. I can't, I'm really busy, I'm sorry, get in touch in 6 months. It's really hard, but try and do it. I'm not perfect at it, but I've seen so many times where that's come back to bite me, where I haven't done it, like, hey, come on, I've been trying to get hold of you for the past 2 years, and here's now my great startup, which has raised a lot of money, and we like to have you as an advisor, and I'm like, or we're not looking to have you as an advisor because you never respond to emails. Or whatever it is, it's a small world. You will come across the same people over and over again. The other thing I will say is do the right thing toward investors. If you think your business isn't working out, tell them. Say that, hey, I have a challenge. We can now jointly decide to put in more money and pivot. We can decide to cut our losses here. We can do lots of things. Include your investors and, even more importantly, your staff. Never, ever screw your staff. Your staff have joined you on a mission. They've joined you on this enterprise, if you like, to boldly go where no man has gone before, or woman. And you hold their careers in your hand. Respect that. These people who come into startups in the first place will have learned a lot from your startup. They will then go on to something different. You will want to be able to work with them again. If you respect your staff, they will respect you. They will tell their friends, and it'll be 100 times more important, easier to hire in the future. Do the right thing. It's a small world. 3, hire and fire aggressively but respectfully. Strategic capabilities are areas where you might need to get in one really senior person. They might not work out. You might need to let them go and get another person in. The team that you have is the most important asset you have. You need to be able to make it the best possible team. There's no shame in telling somebody, look, you've been here 2 months. You're not working out, not because of you, but you will be much more successful somewhere else. You'll never want to be in a small startup where you'll never get promoted. The reason you go to startups is so you can climb up quickly. We will not promote you. Go find yourself another job, because there's not a fit between what you're good at and what we want, our strategic capabilities that we're trying to build. Do that aggressively, but do it very respectfully. It's a matter of reputation. It's the biggest asset you have, your integrity, your reputation as an entrepreneur. Take care of both those things. 4, recognize your strengths and blind spots. I talked about this a little bit before, but just like you have capabilities as a company and blind spots as a company, figure out what yours are as an entrepreneur. Some people are kind of people. So they are really good at motivating, really good at kind of creating that magic that gets other people to work really well together, and that gets them to give that extra mile. But they're really rubbish at numbers and finance. Or some people are product people, really good at figuring out those little details that are everything in your product. But they really suck at creating great relationships with staff. Figure out what you're good at. Get really good at those things and hire folks to do the things that you're not so good at. Don't try to be good at everything. The only area where I would challenge you to be a little bit good at everything, if you're a business person, learn tech. Go out and learn, create a Flash application, a little one, a clock that goes round and round. That thing took me like 2 weeks to do, so I'm not a coder. But if you're a business person, learn a little bit of code. If you're a coder, you're a rock star already, but learn a little bit of business. Become a product manager. Do a role for a little while, which makes you not code, but think about the business. You will be 10 times as valuable as a result. But even then, once you've done those things, understand what you're really good at and focus on that. Hire people to cover your blind spots. Now finally, believe. As I said right from the beginning, now is an absolutely unique time in the industry. Never ever before has there been the combination of industry disruption in terms of crazy things happening on stock markets and big companies not being able to invest, having an opportunity for small companies for it to be so cheap and quick to set up small companies, and for there to be so much transformation in how consumers are behaving. This is the time to go out and do it. It might seem scary at first. You guys who've done projects, will get a sense of roughly what it's about. Just do it. You will be in, I would say, 5 to 10 years' time, nobody who's done startups ever and gotten into a couple has ever regretted it. The worst thing that can happen is that you end up taking a role in a more mature startup later with that experience that makes you a really senior guy at a more mature startup. It really is worth it. So believe. Thank you. That one guy believes. Yes, my job is nearly done. Good. Since I have the microphone, I tend to make it a... Okay, that's okay. We can reopen the presentation. Since I have the microphone, I've actually made it a habit. Actually, this is a good lesson for you guys. When you have the microphone, you command the audience of a room, you can ask for shit, right? You can actually ask people to do different things and they tend to listen to you. So let me give you guys some asks. We are building this ecosystem together. So here are some asks. To-dos, if you like. Here's your to-do list. So now paper and pen, everybody. Politicians. Do we have anybody involved in the political community here in the room today at all? You guys laugh, but I'm a little bit sad. Good. You are not the Prime Minister, who I do recognize. No. But what I will say is this. I've met David Cameron, who's the Prime Minister of the UK, twice in the past 2 years. I'm Facebook friends with Ed Vaizey, who is the Culture Minister of the UK right now. They are that focused on creating a fantastic startup ecosystem in the UK that they bother to come and see me. They bothered, well, okay, technically speaking, I went to see them, but I like to think that they came and see me, but, hey. But technically, but they are really that focused on creating that environment. Here's a huge opportunity in Finland. Look at this room, look at the opportunities we have. Where are the politicians? So you will be the torch bearer, the message bearer back to the politicians. Not just to talk about how entrepreneurship can help transform Finland, create the jobs, create the next big strategic capability for us as a country, just like we've had forestry and the paper industry and Nokia and other things. Here's our potential to create the next big growth wave of jobs and tax revenue and all those things that politicians are interested in. And it's really cheap. Just talk about it. Talk about how exciting it is. That's what the UK politicians are doing right now, and boy, is it working. Tech City is a massive attempt, if you like, by the politicians to create some clustering effects in London, and it's really, really working incredibly well right now. And think about the strategic talent that we could build together in this country by simply talking about it, getting more people to do startups, and ultimately helping create these massively profitable, world-beating internet companies together over time. So that's my message to all you politicians out there, especially you. Notepad. You remember it, yeah? Good. Universities. Who's here representing universities? Hey, much bigger success here. You're both. That's pretty impressive. So here I would challenge you guys to celebrate dropouts. I know this is scary, but Harvard talks so much about Mark Zuckerberg that dropped out and set up Facebook. Ultimately, your mission as a university, and I'm lecturing you about what your mission is, it's kind of funny, but anyway, I believe your mission as a university should be to create successful people in any walk of life. How cool is it if instead of investing 3, 4, 5, 6 years of your time to make somebody successful, you managed to do it in 1 year or 2 years? They already went away and created a success. That is productivity for you. You should celebrate this. Celebrate these dropouts who go out and try out different things. Invite them back if they don't succeed. I think that's perfectly fine. But go out and celebrate it. It's amazing. People who are willing to give up what their mom thinks they should be doing in order to go out and change the world. We should celebrate that. Not go, 10% of our folks dropped out and did these pesky startups that, are ruining our pass rate or our fail rate. Celebrate this. This is cool. That's for you universities. Press. Who's here representing press today? It's like saying people who are both politicians, press, and universities. This really is a more centralized country than I gave it credit for being. Help build awareness. I've read more about Angry Birds in the Financial Times in London than I've ever seen in any Finnish media. And I do read both Kauppalehti and MTV3 and news and other quality outlets of news in this country. So why don't we tell these stories? These are fantastic stories of entrepreneurship and success that for whatever reason we're a bit worried about telling. Let's talk about these stories. They are really cool. And let's elevate our heroes, those folks who've done really well here and abroad and everywhere. Because ultimately people will follow examples. I think it's, in fact, this is my segue to the next point. Graduates, so university graduates, which is probably many of you. How many of you are university graduates? Or about to become university graduates if you don't drop out and become a startup, which you should think about doing. But anyway, that's good. Lots of you guys. Join up, even if you don't start a company right now, even if you think that, oh, I don't really know enough, I'm not certain if I should be doing this right now. Don't start a company. Join a company as a product manager. Banks, I didn't have room for the word consultancies, but you can equate banks and consultancies. They're both evil. They will rip your brain power. They will rip your brain power and harness it in these evil money-making schemes in the world, right? I'm serious. That is what they do. That is what they get bright young people, they work them 18 hours a day rather, and then they kind of take your brain juice and make it some international, venture that may or may not make some money, may or may not exploit human rights and all sorts of things behind the scenes. Why not tap that brain power and change the world? You don't have to start up your own company. You can join some of the very cool, very well-funded startups out here to learn. What's the worst thing that can happen? Is in 1 year's time, you decide, you know what, you don't like it. This whole changing the world business is for somebody else. You want to go hook yourself up to the brain drain machine. And, that is your thing. If that's what you want to do, you can go and do it. You will be infinitely more respected in that community for having tried out a startup beforehand. Because startups are unique. There's nowhere else that you get that sense of running an entire business. Even if you're a product manager at a company here, you will be running some aspect of a business. And that experience is just totally unique. Whether it's then, a big bank, a big consultancy, a big other deadbeat company X that wants to hire you, and you really want to do that, they will pay you more, they will give you a better job for it. Do it. There's no reason not to. Finally, for the Aalto Entrepreneur Society, guys, you guys have done an absolutely unbelievable effort at pulling this community here together, at making the startup scene that, frankly, 3 years ago in Finland, to me as a sort of semi-foreigner living in London, seemed dead, into being a place that buzzes with startups, with financing, with just cool stuff like this event happening. So I think Aalto Entrepreneur Society is the one thing that shouldn't change anything else other than have an even bigger vision, put even more financing behind it, and go out and take over the world. With that, thank you very much.
You ruined all my questions.
Okay, good.
You answered them all. We're running a bit late for schedule, so we have a time for a few questions from the audience. So raise your hands and just shout it out. You in the middle. Yes, you with the glasses. Yes, just you.
Okay, hi Kristian.
Hello.
My name is Ville Westerinen from an amazing company called Ray Area.
I believe we met.
You might know, yes. So here's the thing. With your experience with startups, you have all kinds of people, like you said, fire the super talent, right? So how do you motivate? How do you make them tick, like as one team, when you have so many different types of people? So how do you kind of,
Yeah, the question
the spirit and make it, work as a one whole?
Yeah, so the question is, for those of you who didn't hear it, is how do you create team spirit and how do you get people from varied backgrounds and with different kind of, motivations to feel like one team? I've got two bits of advice. One is the story. The better your story is, the more engaging it is, the bigger it is, the more your people feel part of it and feel consulted in making it. Don't make it your story. Make it your story as a group. Get them to help you to really make the story the biggest so they feel they're massive stakeholders in it. And they are really carriers of the flag of this story. That is my first piece of advice. My second piece of advice is copious amounts of alcohol. Usually helps. But more than anything, I think, now, but joking aside, helping set strategic objectives together, help them become part of that group that thinks about everything from financing and everything else. Do an offsite. Take everybody into an island somewhere and leave the alcohol aside for a second and talk about the actual really serious things. So you all feel like you've made some of these key decisions together and they're really part of it. They're not separate from you as the entrepreneur is helpful. And story is important. And then ultimately, it's what entrepreneurs do at the end of the day. You've got to find a way to do it. I mean, you have a super exciting company. I doubt that you're going to have any challenges in doing it. But But yeah, that's what I would advise. Not sure if it's helpful.
Let's take another question from here, and then let's continue with the startups. They're looking horribly anxious here.
Hey, I'm Miikka Kukkosuoppo. I'm a co-founder of Arctic Startup, among other things, and I have a bit of a personal question. So, you talk about
How personal?
talk about creating $1 billion companies and working in firms, and so when debated that those kind of entrepreneurs who kind of aim at that level, they barely have time for anything else, and they are really and need to be obsessed about the company all the time. And I see that you're wearing a ring, so I presume that you have so-called life as well, and unless that's related to the investor merits.
Yes, excellent index. Yeah, that's right.
I'm wondering that, can you tell a bit more about your working habits, like have you been working round hours or 7 hours per day, and have you got any lessons learned about the so-called work-life balance?
Work-life balance. That's a fantastic question. So for those of you who didn't hear it, it's about work-life balance. If you try to create massive world-beating companies, they do require your time. Can you have a life outside of it? Can you stay married and all that stuff? It's tough. It's really hard. Frankly, I'm glad my first companies, I literally worked 24/7, during the week and weekends all the time. Didn't have many girlfriends at the time, which, for obvious reasons. But actually, it is possible. I think it's not. Ultimately, what I've found over time, I've become more and more productive, and I've actually ended up working less and less and less. Once you learn how to hire people to do the right things, you learn to scale sufficiently, you understand where you need to personally be doing something and where you just need to let other people take the full responsibility for it, you're actually perfectly able to manage your working hours. You become addicted to it, so you have to make an effort. It becomes like another project. Like, I've got a calendar event in my calendar today between 6 o'clock and 8 o'clock to put my kids to bed. This is a calendar event. Nobody can schedule anything because I'm going to be at home putting my kids to bed. After 8 o'clock, they might be scheduling something before 6 o'clock, but that is the window. And it's in my work calendar. It's not anywhere else. So that's why I would encourage that you actually think of, and this is, by the way, even set out date nights with your wife every 2 weeks. I mean, it's really stupid things, but put them in your work calendar. Maybe don't put date night with wife, put important critical meeting with key stakeholder of our success, which is true, But it will keep it will keep that evening free for you. So just put them in your calendar, and you can perfectly combine them.
I'll take the last question before we go.
Okay.
What would you say to the startups here today presenting their 5-ish minute demos? What would you expect them to show, and how would you encourage them?
What would I expect them to show? More than anything, I think inspiration. I think that sense, combined passion and kind of uniqueness of idea, where you can tell the biggest predictor of any success of a game or a team that I've ever seen is the joint passion the team has for its success. Passion shows, passion you can tell. Even if you get everything else wrong, you're the most horriblest presenter, your computer doesn't work, nothing works, and your business model is a bit wonky, and you only think that you're going to be a $100 million company. If you're super passionate about it, people and money will follow. Be passionate. Be my biggest piece of advice.
Okay. So, now we have to cut you off. Sorry for that.
Good.
So we're going to have to bring you the next time here
Ready
also.
to go down? Right,
no,
good.
not yet.
Okay.
So how many of you will attend the next day when we have him talking here? Raise your hands.
Please. Thank you. At least some. Look, 30% at least.
That was pretty lousy round of applause. I mean, honest. Come on, let's give the man a big hand.
Thank you very much.